This week, we celebrate the joy that Christ's advent is near. We will not have to wait forever. The joy of Advent is that even though we are still waiting, we know Christ's coming among us is very near. Israel's waiting will not go on forever. The child is about to be born, and our waiting will not go on forever as Jesus' return draws near. This confident anticipation fills us with joy, a joy that lifts our hearts above the chaos of this life and prepares us to rejoice with Jesus forever. Isaiah 35 verses 1 and 2 says, "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God."
Good morning, Anchor. Wasn't that beautiful? Wasn't that fantastic? It's at this point in this year, like if you were to look back at my life when I was an elementary school age kid, that things got really interesting in my home. Christmas was coming. I mean, things shifted when I was a teenager. I became like classically teenager indifferent to all things, even though I still wanted all the gifts on my, list. But when I was like in elementary school, like I didn't bother hiding it. I became a detective around this time of the year. You know what I'm talking about, right? I hunted in all of the closets. In my parents' closets, in my own closet, in my brother's closet. I was on the case. I was gonna figure out what the presents were that were purchased or yet to be purchased, or that I had to continue to suggest to mom and dad through subtle means of drawing pictures and placing them on the refrigerator, maybe even with little captions saying, "Have you bought this yet?" I shook all the presents. I smelled the presents. I put my ear up to the presents to see if there was some noise inside. I was a detective. I asked probing questions. I was gonna figure out. As the gifts accumulated in greater and greater numbers, I was gonna figure out. I remember one year, my brother, I asked him, he's a couple years younger than me, and I said, "I can't wait for Christmas. Can you wait for Christmas?" And he said, "Yeah, I can wait," right? I didn't understand it. I was stoked. Parents, is that still a thing? No, apparently. Yeah, maybe, yeah. The detective kids, you find them in your closet. Get out of there. What was behind all of that? Like if you boil that down, that like fixation, that excitement, I think you could say it was hope, right? Hope. Hope that I'd figure out what was mine. Hope that mom and dad would catch my clues and pony up for the big purchase. Hope. It's a Christmas word. It's a word that feels appropriate at this time of the year to bring out. It's on cards and on songs, the time of the year where songs about real hope are played on all radio stations. It's a word that we bring out and dust off and all celebrate at this time of the year, hope. But not only that, it's actually tethered theologically to this time of the year and this season of Advent that the church celebrates, that we participate in. The word Advent, it means to draw near or to approach. And so we look forward to the drawing near of Jesus, for him to come and to make all things new, just like the Old Testament people looked forward for the drawing near of the manger. And then similarly, we also approach with hope this Christmas season. Hope. Hope gets us out of bed in the morning. Take hope from a person and there isn't much reason to go forward. Hope moves us. It keeps pushing us forward. If you take hope away from us, we start to lose our humanity. Dante, a medieval poet, writer who wrote the book Inferno, which is about his tour through hell. Sounds like a fun read, right? At the beginning, or as he's about to enter into the Inferno, there's this sign that's interesting, and it says this: it says, before entering, abandon all hope. The idea being that hope, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, there's something about hope, the way God has made us, that it is inescapable. We have to have it if we're going to live. A hope is an essential element of us and our existence. And it's important to note, hope is not optimism. You know, optimism is a sunny disposition towards the future, right? It's believing that the cards are going to end up my way, that the dice is going to favor me. Optimism gets you in real trouble when you gamble and you're an optimistic person. That's a problematic spot. So optimism is just believing that everything will work out. And hope is also not manifesting or positive thinking that with my positive energy, I'll manifest anything I want, whether it's a Christmas gift or some type of something else, whether a financial thing or a relationship. Hope is not positive thinking or manifesting. That's not what hope is. Hope is this. Hope is believing in spite of. Believing in spite of. So hope, like according to Scripture, is to believe in the goodness of God, the power of God, the mercy of God, in spite of what we see in the news feed or what we even see in our own hearts. Hope is the belief in the grace of God in spite of what we see in the mirror. Hope is belief in spite of. Biblical hope is this powerful hope that tethers us to something stronger than ourselves. I love this verse from the author of Hebrews. He says this in Hebrews 6:19. It says, we have this hope as an anchor for the soul. Think about this. An anchor is something connected to one thing and to another thing. An anchor doesn't have power if the thing is connected, if that anchor is connected from one thing to the other thing. It has no power unless it's buried in something strong, right? So we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. And this is a reference to in the first century world where the Jewish temple, the people would go in, priests would go in once a year to this place called, it was behind the curtain, where the Holy of Holies was, where God's presence was said to dwell. And it was only a priest that could go in through the right process once a year. And the author of Hebrews is saying, we have this type of hope, that our hope enters into that place and it's anchored there. To believe in spite of, because we are tethered to something stronger than ourselves. What I want to do is I want to look at three different angles on hope this morning. And the first is what I'm calling the beauty of hope. The beauty of hope. Throughout this morning, we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 35, verses 1 through 10. And a little background on that before we get to that passage. When Isaiah was writing and when God was speaking to Isaiah, Israel was in this unique predicament throughout its life and its history. You see, long ago, God brought Israel out of slavery from Pharaoh's tyrannical leadership, delivered Israel from slavery, and put them in the promised land. Now, God's promise was that in the promised land, because that's what it is, promised land, it was this place of rest, this place where they were not going to be under Pharaoh's watch. They didn't have to worry about the oppressive power of Pharaoh, that they could relax, take a breath, let their shoulders kind of ease up a little bit, and just know that they were given the resources they need, this land of milk and honey, this place that was theirs, that was theirs, that was theirs. And the only conditions were that they had to worship Yahweh and no other gods. And they had to care for the poor. If you could boil down the conditions, you could say there's more, but really that's what they were. Care for the hurting, care for the poor, care for the forgotten, and worship no other gods. Well, a few generations and they start forgetting the poor and worshiping other gods. And so God, in his severe mercy, takes them from the promised land and allows foreign invaders to raid and raze and bring and usurp the promised land from the Israelites and bring the Israelites into Babylonian captivity. And so Isaiah is writing in that context, where things look bleak, where they're away from home, where they're in a place where nobody speaks their language, and they are not familiar with the city streets, and everybody's customs are different. So we get the line from that psalm, how can we sing the praises of our God in a foreign land? Everything is confusing. And it's in that context that Isaiah, from God, brings a word of hope. Beginning of chapter 35 reads like this: the desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it. The splendor of Carmel and Sharon, they will see the glory of the Lord and the splendor of our God. Each of those little names, Lebanon and Carmel and Sharon, they're references to the best parts of Israel. And as Isaiah is saying that to Israel, Israel's remembering all the good stuff that they no longer experience. But Isaiah is saying on behalf of God that there will be a day where you'd smell and taste and see that once again. A word of hope in the midst of a bleak situation. I don't know about you, but it's easy for me sometimes to forget those good times, right? Years ago when we lived in Ellensburg, and something you need to know about Ellensburg, Washington is called the Evergreen State, but drive an hour, you're in a whole different landscape, guys. It is a barren shrub steppe environment. And in Ellensburg in the wintertime, snow is everywhere, but then the snow melts. And so you have kind of ice and slush, and it mixes with the dirt, so it doesn't look nice. And it stays around forever because every night it freezes again. And in the summertime, you have this oppressive heat getting into the triple digits in the heat of the day. And it turns everything into this bleak, kind of like bleached out yellowish landscape. Definitely my yard. And in the middle of winter and in the middle of summer, it's very easy to forget the spring. In fact, the oppressive cold or the oppressive heat begins to normalize and dominate the imagination. I remember some moments where there's this 6-week period in Ellensburg called spring. And everything's green. I remember getting up early for runs kind of in the surrounding canyons and kind of ridge lines and finding my way along creek beds and taking single track trails around little hills and seeing elk and seeing little flowers pop up. And you ran that same place a week ago and the flowers weren't there. And there's little snow melt kind of trickling, of course, through little creek beds. And it's just this beautiful place. And when I think about this poem, this word that God gives Isaiah, I think God is wanting them to remind them that spring is coming even though it feels like winter or summer. The interesting thing, this is really what God is doing. God is giving Israel a promise that entails all that is pained and problematic being reversed. And the interesting thing is that this promise never comes to fruition yet. Israel comes back from Babylon, and they have this great expectation that this is the year, this is the time, everything's going to be great. Finally, and then they get back to Israel, the place called home, and it isn't quite like they wanted. It isn't quite like they imagined. So what does that mean? The promise that God gave Israel through Isaiah is a promise that we are still waiting for its final realization. Which means that we join in with Israel in looking forward with hope to the spring that is still yet to come, to the impossibility becoming possible. Though we feel like it may be the coldest time of the year, there is a promise that spring will still come. So what we have to do is, to using that language from Isaiah, come to think about what is our desert right now. What is our sun-scorched part of our own life? The fact is that everybody came in here, in this place, with a little desert in their life. Some of us got bigger ones, some of us got smaller ones. We all got things that we would say feel impossible. Maybe there's a diagnosis. Maybe there's a strained relationship. Maybe you're wondering how the mortgage is going to be paid because the presents have to be purchased. Maybe you're wondering about something else, but no doubt there's a desert. And the word from Isaiah, from God through Isaiah, is that the impossibility now is possible. The only thing is, and this is really important, if you're like a note taker, you want to make sure to be on the go right now, on the balls of your feet. This is important, okay? That though the desert's going to bloom, though the impossibility is now possible because we have hope in God, and that promise is still waiting out in the future. Though spring is coming, here's the thing: it's not on our terms and timeline. You see, here's what happens when we try to put hope on our terms and our timeline. When we contort hope to our terms and timeline, what happens is we sanctify our own agenda and we ask God to become our servant. Biblical hope reverses that. Biblical hope asks us to surrender our agenda and become God and the world's servant. So we have to enter into this vulnerable place of knowing that God can turn a desert into a garden, but we can't make it happen on our own terms and timeline. This is the tension of biblical hope. That God is able, but it's not on our terms and our timeline. Biblical hope is not characterized by a when or a what, but by a who. You see, Israel had turned their hope into a when and a what. When we get back to the promised land, everything will be good then. On that point, on that calendar, when that happens, then everything will be great. But what we learned is that hopes built around whens and whats are fragile hopes. Hopes built around who, if the who is God, become strong hopes. I have a business professor friend. He's a professor at Central Washington University, and he talks to me sometimes about transformational and transactional relationships. A transactional relationship is you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I'm not personally invested in you, but you're providing enough of a service for me to continue to come to you because it's at a certain price point that is unbeatable by the competition. But if the competition started dropping their price point, I'd go to them because I'm not actually invested in you as a person. I'm just invested in the product that you're giving me according to these terms. That's a transactional relationship. A transformational relationship is that I'm invested in you. You're invested in me. We're invested in each other. I'm eager to see you experience flourishing and well-being and shalom. I want that, and I sense that you want that for me. And in that space, that overlap of mutually leaning in, beautiful things can happen. And what God is saying is that he's not interested in transactional relationships, where we go to him because he offers a product that nobody else can offer, and so we satisfy our needs with him because he can do something, and then we can go to someplace else whenever the price drops other places. God wants a transformational relationship, a relationship that is not built around when or what, but built around who. And it's in that place of mutually leaning in In fact, the language of Advent is completely appropriate as it means to draw near. As we draw near to him, as he draws near to us, what happens is he starts to transform our hearts and our agenda. And so what we thought we really needed might kind of drip or push back to the background, and something else comes to the foreground. Why? Because we're in this transformational relationship. This is the beauty of hope. That God is able to transform a desert into a garden. And he's invested and interested in you. And he doesn't want any to perish and wants you to see shalom. But there's this process of sometimes he has a different priority list than we do. There's also this other element of hope I'm calling the character of hope. What is it really about? What is not just the beauty, but like the focus, the center point, the character of hope. You jump a little forward in Isaiah 35 in verse 5 to 7. It says, "Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground bubbling springs. And in the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow." And at first, it looks like pretty much a reiteration of the first thing. The impossible becoming possible. The unimaginable becoming imaginable. It looks like almost like the same thing. And there are a lot of elements where it is the same as the passage we just read in the beginning. But what's interesting is that when you look into the New Testament, and there's this interaction between Jesus and some disciples of John the Baptist. Now, if you don't know anything about John the Baptist, he was a peer, actually a relative of Jesus, and he was a spiritual leader in the same time as Jesus and actually baptized Jesus and had his own kind of like disciples as well, just like Jesus had his disciples. And at one point, John gets locked away and put in prison because he's speaking truth to power. He's talking about how King Herod is doing some bad stuff. So King Herod says, "Well, I'll just put you in jail then. That's how I treat you." And so John's in prison, and he has his disciples go to Jesus, and this is the situation where we pick it up in verse 2 of Matthew chapter 11. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." What is Jesus doing there? Jesus is saying, tell John the Baptist that Isaiah 35 is fulfilled in me. Tell John the Baptist that Isaiah was talking about me. That the world was trembling with expectation for a little baby born in the manger, and that baby grew up, and God chose and desires to use him to bring all people to himself. Tell John that the world has been waiting for me. Don't expect anyone else. Israel's exile. It's interesting. I mean, like when Israel came back from exile, like I mentioned, their hopes were kind of squished or quenched or some other verb. It didn't happen like they wanted. What's interesting is that Jesus is saying there's a greater exile than just geography. There's an exile that happened at the beginning of time when humanity sinned and put us east of Eden, and now we've inherited this brokenness that is easy to see because we all know that we've all messed up and we live in this land that's affected by brokenness. And what Jesus is doing, he steps into this world that's affected by sin, and he says, I am the one to bring you home from the exile of sin and brokenness. While Israel thought it was geographic exile, Jesus steps on the scene and says, no, the greater exile is delivering you home from the pain and brokenness in your heart and in this world. This is what Jesus' mission is. Which means this, biblical hope is not an ideology. Biblical hope is not a political conviction. It's not even really good theology. Biblical hope is not an affinity with a certain pastor or a certain thinker. Biblical hope is Jesus. That's what Jesus' explanation is to John. Expect no one else. Which leads us to this very important last window into hope. It's what I'm calling the power of hope. The power of hope. One thinker said that one of the tests of authentic hope is that if it can stand up to reality, any reality. So you can think about this. You can even think internally. It's like, okay, is the hope that I have, will it stand up to X reality, this reality? How will it endure if this happens or that happens? And that's actually one of the ways that you can test your hope. Will my hope sustain me if this happens? And if it won't sustain me if that happens, you should be looking for a greater hope. If your hope is made up from the stuff of this world, it will crumble when the world throws its worst at you. This is important for us to get. I'm going to play preacher and read this again. If your hope is made up of the stuff of this world, it will crumble when the world throws its worst at you. But if your hope is rooted in stuff beyond this world, then it can outlast the worst of this world. The stronger the object of hope, the stronger the hope. This is the principle of the anchor. That if the anchor is in something strong, then it will endure through a storm. If the anchor is in sand, it'll send the ship to sea. Where is your hope? Where have you put your hope? What is anchoring you right now? At this moment. It's cool because Isaiah, he speaks to this power of hope when he says in verse 3, strengthen the feeble hands and steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear. And I want to just stop there for a moment. We'll keep this scripture on the screen. You see, like if Isaiah was telling Israel to strengthen the feeble hands and to steady the knees that give way and to say with those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear, if he was doing that just as kind of an order, like a barking coach, like, shut up and stop crying, that's not what we do here. If he was doing that, it would be exhausting. People would walk away. It would be at best moralizing and at worst toxic. But it's not what he's doing. You see, the next part of this verse is incredibly important. Because after he says, say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear, he says, why? Your God will come. Your God will come. If you have a source of strength that is stronger than the world, you can steady knees and calm feeble hands. You can tell fear, peace, be still, because there's a stronger hope that is accessible to you. It's stronger than a bigger credit limit. It's stronger than the best relationship you could imagine. It's stronger than that new car. It's stronger to that friend of yours saying that thing you want them to say. It's stronger than all of that. It's stronger than the best Christmas present. It can outlast any storm. It can endure any trial. That's the type of hope we're talking about. I don't know if you know, some sailors used to get hold fast tattooed on their hands, and I'm thinking about that, so just keep that in mind. My wife said, you have to get more tattoos if you get knuckle tattoos. And I said, well, hon, sounds like that's an invitation. So I don't know how you feel about a pastor having knuckle tattoos, but, we can hope, we can hope. But they would get this tattoo, hold fast on their knuckles, because when a storm would come, they'd need to hold on to something stronger than their own stability. They'd grab on to something there on the boat. hold on to it. And the thing is when you hold on to something tightly, your knuckles get white, which highlights it even more. Hold fast, reminding you, my only hope is if I hold fast. And all hope goes away if I stop holding fast. Hold fast to the thing stronger than yourself. Hold fast to the thing stronger than yourself. This passage ends where it says, your God will come. He will come with vengeance and divine retribution. He will come to save you, which is a funny thing to say. I mean, couldn't you just come to save? I mean, the divine retribution, I don't know. What's being communicated there is that God takes the evil and brokenness of this world on the macro and micro levels seriously. But the interesting thing is that when God does come in the form of a humble baby, and he ends up taking all that retribution on himself. So when he comes to quench and solve the problem of evil, he allows all that to fall on him, the pain of exile to fall on him so that we can experience the warmth of home on the cross. And this is like the invitation. Oftentimes we need some type of guarantee that the one who is asking us to hope in them is worthy of our hope. And there is no sign that communicates the worthiness of him than him experiencing something as challenging as the cross. Do you want a guarantor of his worthiness, of our hope? It is the depths of his love communicated in that place. And even in this time, where we look towards the manger, it's the shadow of the cross casts over the manger, because that was the mission why he came. And every week we celebrate that with communion, so communion team and worship team can come forward, and as well as the prayer team. And like when you say yes to what he has invited us to, when you say yes to his mercy and yes to his grace, and when you say yes to him, it brings this new level of meaning when you come forward for communion, because we hear from somebody's lips you may not know, Christ's body given for you, and Christ's blood shed for you. What a beautiful thing as you eye to eye hear from someone that his mercy meets you. His love is focused on you. That he is worthy of your hope. That's the invitation to everyone today, whether for the first or the 1,000th time, is to say yes to the offer of a stronger hope than the world can produce. And as the band begins to play and as we sing this song and then think about communion, and there's these prayer stations that are available, and take that opportunity for prayer. I want to read this last part of this passage. We don't have it on the screen, so just can maybe close your eyes and just be present to these words and let these words kind of meet you. Isaiah concludes this section saying, and a highway will be there. Call to mind a highway, this big place, this thoroughway, how all this traffic is going in this one direction. A highway will be there, and it will be called the way of holiness. It will be for those who walk on the way. The unclean will not journey on it. The wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there, nor any ravenous beast, meaning there's no threats, there's no pain, there's no hurt, there's no deserts. It's gardens all around, and it's peace all around. That all those ravenous beasts, they will not be found there, but only the redeemed will walk there. And those the Lord has rescued will return, and they will enter Zion singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Israel thought that was a promise to them returning back to their homeland, but we know now that it is a promise of our ultimate homeland, the highway going right to the heart of God, that you are invited to take part in even right now. Come for prayer. Come hear those words of God's mercy directed towards you at communion. Sing, relish, revel in this fact that you are offered